Hi, I'm Susie Jacob, and you're watching Porch Talk. Today we have a returning guest, Dr. Joseph Karpinski. He's also known as Dr. Joe. Had a very interesting life, so we have him back today. So welcome back. Um, so we'll get right into it. Your father owned a business right on Perrine Street. What was it like growing up there and running the business?
Well, first I want to say thank you again for having me back. I usually people don't like to have me back, so I'm very happy to be back again, and I'm very pleased to see this lovely lady because I could say it her name in two ways. You could say her name is Jacob, or in Polish Jakub. And Jakub used to live on Cottage Street, and I knew him. He run a restaurant also on Route 25 going out of Genesee Street. I just would like to review sometime I didn't do last time about my living at 11 or 47 Pine Street because my dad, who had to leave school at the end of sixth grade because his mother died in childbirth. He had three siblings, two sisters and a brother younger than he, and he had to take care of his dad, who worked in the Medina quarry, made a living. My dad was my uncle Steve. I did say in my last it was Uncle Al, but actually his name was Uncle Steve Hirsch. Called my father up one day and said, "There's a store open across the street." And by the way, at that time, my dad was a part owner of a clock factory in Medina, New York, and yeah, here was a man, 24 years old, was already an entrepreneur in the fact that he and O'Reilly owned the Medina clock. So anyway, he followed Uncle Steve's word and came down to Auburn and opened up his clothing store. Now, mind you, he knew nothing about what the clothes were, and I explained it last time that he didn't know how to mark up anything. But anyway, we all lived above the store, and as I mentioned, we stayed open from 7 to 11. And before I tell a little bit about the family, I just want to say a little bit about my dad. Is that I didn't realize what a remarkable man he was, because with that store, he educated 4 professional sons. He was an undertaker and an embalmer. He was an interpreter. He was went into Albany to be on the War Mobilization Board. He was a remarkable man, and I didn't really realize it, and I wish I had spent more time with him. But anyway, getting back to 47 Pine Street, if you stood on the corner of Pine and State Street, there were 12 saloons, just that you could. And I actually would like to just list them all because it'll bring back, because probably no one else will ever remember what they were. But there was Grugins and Thomas and Conjolas and Lawrences, and there was Max, Kubareks, as Swifties. Well, actually, Swifties was Gushcha was the name of the people, and there was Calletons by the railroad track. There was Hirsches, there was Rybarczyks, and of course there were the Polish Home, which would make it 13, and also there was another restaurant going on Seymour Street, Kozlowski's, which again would make it 14. So
Wow.
it was quite a place to see activity.
Absolutely.
And as long as we're on the subject of saloons, they'd call them saloons. They were not restaurants because actually they didn't serve much food. You could find Limburger cheese on most bars with little crackers, and that was about the extent of the food that they served. And I feel that the people who don't realize what activities went on down in that area, because there was also an ice cream store called Jasper Stein's Dairy Lee. Now, Jasper Stein's Dairy Lee was this lovely place where I would go and get my ice cream, but on Saturday and Friday, the back room there was a pool table, and on this pool table would on the weekends would set up boards, and it was the biggest gambling place in central New York. And what Mr. Stein used to tell, since there were so many saloons, he would tell these people that come down to gamble there to park their cars away from his ice cream store because they didn't want people think. But actually, that went on for years. Wow. The gamblers would come from Syracuse, Rochester. It was just unbelievable. I know I wandered in there one time, one Friday night, and there was this bunch smoking. They all smoked cigars at the time around this table, shooting crap, as they say. And no one knew. Of course, they had to pay off somebody in the city of Auburn because I don't think they were allowed that. And another interesting thing about that area is that it had this bakeries. It had two bakeries. You had Sally Ann Bakery, which is owned by the Rose brothers out of Syracuse, and then there was the Mother's Bakery, owned by a Polish family a block away, and the Rose Bakery used to supply Sampson Base at 2, 3 in the morning. When I was living with my mom and dad, I could look out my window. A trim 18-wheelers, two of them would come and load up with bread and drive it over to Sampson Base for the sailors that were being trained there. I don't know whether we certainly have talked a little bit about my area. I think that also should know there was a lumber mill there. There was a brick on Pine Street. It pretty well covered all the bases. There was Rogalski's homemade ice cream place, and there was. But the biggest two characters in the area were a fellow by the name of Żabka, and the other fellow's name was Ditchy Gall. And these two individuals were the area characters. What they would do, they both, unfortunately, drank, and their living was cleaning the bars. And they would get paid with a shot and a beer to clean the spittoons and clean.
Wow.
And don't forget, all the bars had spittoons in. And they would clean that, and then they would sleep it off. I used to see them sleeping in my dad's backyard there. My dad let them sleep it off as far as it. But for years, they used to, Żabka, everybody knew the characters, Żabka and Ditchy Gall. And I tell you, I don't think there's anybody in the TV audience can remember these two characters because I think that pretty well everybody's gone that's went. Now, I don't know what other things you want to talk about. As I say, I could talk about that area forever because there was so many unusual things going on.
So, Dr. Joe, since we're talking about that area, there's also the Auburn Prison close to Pine Street. Do you have any experience or any remembrances of the prison growing up?
Well, again, I look at my TV audience. I don't know if there's many other people living, but in December 11th, 1929, my Uncle Steve, so don't forget 29, I was born in 23. 23 makes you 94 years old, see? So just for the TV audience, I realize I look the age, but I am 94 years old. But anyway, Uncle Steve took me by the hand, and I was then 6 years old, and said, I want to show you something. So we walked from Pine Street and to Cottage, to Seymour, to Van Anden, and we stood on the other side of the prison, my Uncle Steve, and he pointed out, look up there, and there were troopers shooting down to the skylight at the prisoners. Wow. There was a riot going on. In that riot, they had taken the principal keeper, George Dunford, and killed him, the prisoners, and they also took the warden, name was Jenkins, and 7 guards hostage. And they held them, but not very long. They held them only for 4 hours, and I tried to do some research to find out whether they were the other guards went in to rescue them or whether they just released them. But anyway, after we watched this, and my photographer will probably show some pictures that he has in his file of that. Actually, it was with Fox News flying over the prison, but he also has pictures of people standing on State Street looking up at, and I could still see the troopers walking out on the roof, shooting down through the skylight and then my uncle Steve never likes to give up a chance. He says, "I want to show you something else." We walked back to Pine Street, up Pine Street to North Street, and he took me, I don't recall whether it was on North Street or one of the side streets, to a barn. And they're laid out with prisoners covered with sheets.
Wow.
At that time, 9 prisoners died in that uprising there. So it's a rather exciting thing that happened. Certainly, again, not too many people were, not that it's a nice thing to talk about,
Right.
but I did see that happen.
So, Dr. Joe, you grew up during Prohibition. Can you tell us about your experiences with that?
With all those bars there, I had a lot of experiences. Of course, most of them were closed. Most of them stayed open. You realize the reason that there were that many bars is because it was a block away from International Harvester, and there was those hard-working people would be working sometimes 12-hour days, and nothing made them feel better is to stop at one of the bars and have a Boilermaker or whatever you want to call it, a shot and a beer. See, that was they would walk in, they'd be set up. It wouldn't be just a glass of beer or just a shot. It always had to be a shot. But the two things I do remember the most of is, as I said, across the street was my uncle, because that's one called my dad.
Right.
Hirsch was his name. Well, Mr. Hirsch was a bold guy. He was not afraid of anything. He was and he always had a cigar in his hand, and he had a touring car. Well, anyway, one day I'm sitting on the curb of my dad's store, and all of a sudden the 2 gigantic, at least they were, I thought at the time, gigantic cars. They were open touring cars with 4 doors, of course, and a group of gentlemen jumping out with sledgehammers, and of course breaking down my Uncle Steve, because Uncle Steve had a speakeasy. The password was, I used to know, Stolat. That's it. If you said Stolat, the door would open for you. But if you didn't say Stolat, no way were you going to get in that place. But anyway, these fellows broke down the door, and within 5 minutes, beer was shooting out from the basement windows.
Wow.
And the interesting part of that happened once, and he, of course, he didn't pay attention to the fact that Prohibition was in force. So he returned. He had built a concrete wall down the basement that actually moved, and the beer was hidden there behind.
Wow.
But anyway, the next time this happened, there's a family, I just rather not mention their names because they may not be happy, but they was a family of 8 people, 8 kids, and father would send them down with pots and pans, and they would catch this beer coming out and run it. It was the funniest thing. Actually, I wish I had cameras of it. They would run, the little kids running with pots and pans, and then back and forth to catch that beer out of the cellar. And then one day I asked one of the kids, "What does your father do with all that beer?" "He puts it in a bathtub." And I says, "Oh, well, that's very interesting, So anyway, that's one of the things. And there was also a restaurant called Max, and Max was very popular as a motorcycle. All the motorcyclists, but also, of course, this is Prohibition. See, so anyway, what they used to do, the motorcyclists didn't stay there to drink because they would get afraid that the Mac would be in trouble. But it was like nowadays they have where you go to Wendy's or going to drive-thrus, and they would like a drive-thru. People would stop in their motorcycle, pick up their beer, and take off. So they would be that way. Mac was that worried about the revenuers coming in and catching him, except he was a very smart man. He actually kept his mother had a grocery store next door. He kept all the beer over in the grocery store, and used to at night they would move it into the liquor store.
Very smart.
So that was the two things that I do remember about with the. But I'd say the biggest reason was there was so many bars was because of the manufacturing plants.
As some of you may or may not know, Dr. Joe is an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts. Can you tell us about some of your experiences as a Boy Scout?
Yeah, the happiest days of my life were as a Boy Scout at Camp Rotary and so on. I received my Eagle Award, rather interestingly, with a fellow by the name of Ellis Meeker. And then the Meeker family used to have around 6 grocery stores in the city of Auburn. Every part of Auburn, except in my section where I was brought up, the Polish Meat and Grocery had 2 stores, so therefore Meeker's was not there. But Meeker and I were buddies, and we got our Eagles together. And also in 1939, they sent a troop down to the World's Fair in New York City. And it was a fantastic trip because we lived right on the ground. We were able to go to see all the exhibits free and so on. But our job was supposedly showing people around, which we didn't know that much about. But anyway, it was a fantastic trip. One of the musts as far as the trip, no civilian clothes. It was all scouting. It was strictly GI as far as the leadership is concerned. But Meeker says to me, "Listen, Joe, we got to go into the city some night." I said, "How are we going to go to the city? You can't go in a scouting outfit." He says, what we'll do is you wrap a pair of pants around your bodies. He says, because when they do inspection, they're going to do an inspection before we get on the bus to see that we don't have any civilian clothes. He says, you wrap this pair of pants, get your thinnest pants, wrap them around your body, and be sure and take some sort of a T-shirt that doesn't have any connections with scouting, and the rest of it, leave it to me. So we're there for a week. We're going down the last 2 days. He says, we're going to do it tonight. I said, when are you going to do it tonight? So he had gotten a hold of some blankets and some other things, and he made 2 bodies sleeping underneath the sheet, and we snuck out of the camp. And they actually had guards, but it was nothing that was real strong. We got on a bus and took us to New York City to Times Square. There were 2 14-year-old kids wandering around, and that was I would never done it, but my Alice, he was a fantastic individual. My children loved him when he used to come to visit us. He flew an airplane. He flew for the Navy. He was a Navy pilot during the war.
Wow, good for
and
him.
After that, this is the second time that I've ever told anyone that I ever did that awful thing of going to Times Square at the age of 14 with
Sneaking
clothes
out.
that were wrapped around my body. And I used to enjoy scouting a great deal, and I say that the happiest days were the 3 years that I would camp. And I want to tell one more story about my scouting experience. When I first got into scouting, I wanted to go to Camp Rotary. Well, Camp Rotary was $1 a day to be there. And of course, my father, when it came time for a deposit to pay the tuition of my 2 brothers, he would holler to my mother upstairs to look for some nickels, dimes, and pennies. He was making a roll to make a deposit in the bank. That's how tight things were. But he made those sacrifices. Well, anyway, so it was as I was saying, it's $1 a day. So I asked him, but please, Dad, could I go for a week to the Scout Camp Rotary? So he gave me the $7 to go.
Wow.
Camp Rotary. I was there 5 days, and I was having a wonderful time. And Meeker was there with me. We were tent mates. And what happens is, I called up my dad. I said, Dad, please, but you have to pay ahead. You couldn't, So I said, could you give me $7 more? And I saw this long pause, and I heard him hollering up to my mother. He used to call my mother Stara. Stara in Polish means old one. But it was just a word of endearment. Stada, I heard him hollering something about this. All right, I was. So he walked from Pine Street up. At that time, the Boy Scouts had their headquarters in the city, Memorial City Hall in the basement, and he went ahead and paid that $7, and I stayed there
Wow.
another week. So
He was a
it
good
was
man.
he was a remarkable person. I mean, he's a remarkable person but I was I was he was good. He was a
Yeah,
good man.
very generous.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about your family?
Well, I think that the families turned out to be fairly successful, all six of them. But I think that it isn't Joe Karpinski. I think it was Honey Karpinski that did it. She had she had something about her. I was down there at my office, but she instilled in those kids so many qualities that they had to become successful. She is a very precise woman. I tell you, people say after someone passes away, they say, "Well, they were wonderful." This is a true story. I only saw her angry once, and
Wow.
that angry was not anger. It was just she was just giving me a lecture, and I considered it a lecture. But she was a nurse, as you know, and she did some wonderful things in her days, and I won't go into details on that, her trips on her lecturing. But she had the ability that when she looked you in the face, you thought that you were the most important person in the world because she had that ability. She made you feel important. And people even now have said to me, some elderly people that I wanted, "Oh, I loved your wife. She always made me feel so good when I talked to her." But anyway, what she instilled in those kids, six of my kids became professional. As you say, to the oldest, and it was interesting. You're a pretty blonde. Now, my oldest son is a blonde. My oldest daughter is a blonde. My middle son is a brunette. The middle daughter is a brunette. But
Wow.
this one's a scary one. My youngest son is a redhead, and my youngest daughter is redhead. The oldest son is a dentist. The next one is an oral maxillofacial surgeon, same as I am. John. Joe was the first one. Then came Paul, and he became an oral maxillofacial surgeon. And then my oldest daughter, who is a pretty blonde, is an endodontist, and she practices in Ithaca and Elmira. And the next one is she. I can still see Christina is the name. Dad, I hate to tell you, I'm going to break this. Not going into the medical field. I'm going to be a lawyer. And she became a lawyer, see?
Good for
And
her.
then the last one is a physician, the redhead. So you see that with those six kids, 54 years of college and graduate school, 54 years. So you see that I was grinding it out while Honey was home taking care of these kids. And how she did it, I don't know. These mothers say, "Oh, I got two kids that drive me crazy."
Mm.
And I said, "How did she do?" I never heard her once complain of anything why we had six kids. And they were close together. I do remember a thing that she used to do. We'd be sleeping and one of the babies would be crying. She would take that child out of the crib or wherever it may be and bring him down into the furthest part of the house, seashore, so she wouldn't disturb me as far as my sleep was concerned. Not too many people do that. And
Sounds like
I
a
mean, I
wonderful
always
woman.
have to confess that I was not one of those fathers who would pick up the child and say, "Honey, you stay in bed." Unfortunately, I never did that. See, so. But anyway, the kids have all done. They're all in practice, and they take care of their old fathers. They bring me food all the time. In fact, they bring me too much food.
You must be very proud.
Well, I'm a happy man.
Yeah.
I'm happy. As long as they're happy, that's the important thing, and they are happy. So
Do you have any grandkids?
I have 11 grandchildren.
Good for
I
you.
wish there were more, but unfortunately, the oldest is at St. John's University in New York, and the rest are pretty young little kids. But they're all very, you know, they have the opportunity to be athletic. They play tennis, they play golf. Mostly everybody plays soccer for some reason. All my children play soccer. That's the story of the family. As I say, we've this house that you're sitting in. We've lived here for 54 years.
Wow.
And it really has been the most enjoyable to look out onto Hoops Park.
Yeah, it's a beautiful home.
Yeah.
Throughout his life, Dr. Joe has had many close calls. Would you like to tell us about a few of them?
And I hate to tell you these close calls, believe me, but they were close enough that I almost am not here. I think that I talked about Meeker, but his father made a boat, and he made it in the basement of his. They lived up here on Alden Avenue, and he made it and he thought he was going to pull the boat out through the open doors, but he never did, so he had to take part of the building off to get the boat out. But anyway, Meeker, maybe 3-4 times during the summer months, Meeker and I, with our dates and another couple or so, would take trips on the Wasco Lake with his father's boat. Now, mind you, his father's boat had no flooring. They had blankets laid out on the inside. But this one time, I was on duty. I was going down to graduate school of medicine in Philadelphia, and I didn't come up early. In fact, I didn't get here till 11. I think I had the duty till 6 o'clock, and I had to come up. And they were all waiting in Meeker's boat. They used to keep it. There used to be a boat livery called Clint Hinton's on the outlet, and they were waiting for me. Of course, they were having a few ginger ales while they were waiting for me, and so I got there, and usually when we went out to the lake, we usually was late anyway, and it would set the tiller so that nobody steered it all. They would just setting it to put down the center of the lake. Well, there's one night, of course, we used the bathroom up at the bow of the ship, the bucket. There was a bathroom, and I was going up to use the bathroom, and you had walkways along. It had a cabin on it, see, and they were all inside the cabin singing a few songs, patriotic songs, of course, and then I had to walk along the side of the cabin. Well, he only had, instead of the usual bars and so on that you hold on, he had like sort of a rope because the father really never finished the boat, see. So I'm walking along, and I slipped down into the water. Now, before I tell you the rest of the story, my father, when he couldn't sell things, he would put them up in his attic, in the store. Well, he had some Panama hats that he couldn't get rid of, so there was a bunch of white Panama hats up there. And for a joke, I brought 5 or 4 of them and brought everybody that night was wearing a Panama hat, including your church. So I fell into the water, and the boat put on the side, came up, and I started. Of course, they're singing, and the boat is putting around, and I'm shouting, "Help! Help!" and they just, like it's a stern light, you could see it smaller and smaller. Here I am, out in the middle of Owasco Lake, and by the way, it was in late August. It was early September, so I had a very heavy sweater on, and I had the jeans on and the sneakers, but the sweater was a big, bulky type of sweater. So anyway, I knew I was in trouble. But in Scout Camp, we used to have a fellow called Smitty, was our director of the waterfront. He was he was a trooper that lost a leg, and he had only one leg, but he got around and did. One thing he taught us was float, learn how to float. So I knocked my sneakers off, and then that was no struggle there. But did you ever try to take a pair of jeans off when it's soaking wet? It's a little bit tough. So here I am. I knew I couldn't swim with all this, but the biggest thing was the sweater. And so after mind you, I couldn't even see the light anymore.
Right.
The boat they were on So finally, I got the sweater off, and I said to her, swim to the east side or the west side? And I decided to swim to the east side. And I started to swim, and apparently, then my date said, "Where's Joe? I haven't seen him in a half hour," or whatever she did. She said. So they decided to come and look for me. They came around. They never. The only thing I always asked them, how come you didn't start the motor up faster to come around? I don't know. Meeker just turned the boat. He said, he went back, and they found my hat floating. And then I heard the girls crying. Because on the water, the sound carries. Mm-hmm. And I was then swimming, and I'd swim a while, and I'd rest a while. See? And finally they were crying that they started, a couple of them started to jump in to see if they saw me, they see me anywhere. And finally, I began swimming back to the boat and shouting, and they finally heard me, and they came and pulled me out. Now, I was then just on a pair of shorts on, see, just a pair of my underpants. So what happens is we go back to Hens, and of course I got the dirty rug, not rug, but the blanket. It was a little covered with oil and all. I'm wearing that. I get there. We ended up at Meeker's dad's apartment. He lived at out on South Street, and of course Meeker was a small man, so was his father, so they had no clothes for me. Well, no one volunteered to take Joe Karpinski back to Pine Street. So I walked from South Street to Pine Street at 3 or more, whatever time it was, in the blanket. In the bare feet, see. And I got in the store. I knew where the hidden key was. So I got in the side door and left the blanket there at the entrance because we had a side door. The store was the front, and my friend, my dear mother, around 5 or so, she was a night hawk. She never comes and shakes my bed and says, "Joseph, are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "You got in awful late." I said, "Yeah, I didn't tell her anything about what had happened to her." So next morning, my father hollers up to Stada, to my mother, and says, "I don't know what it is, but somebody left an oil blanket on the side porch." He says, I don't know what, but find out from Joseph when he wakes up whether he brought that or not." And so anyway, ended up that I owned up to it to my father and told him the story. That was one of my close calls, but the one that really is a scary one. One year I was flying to Shanghai, China to catch a train into Mongolia with a friend of mine. And so I alone, and I came into Shanghai airport, and I went to the money changer to get some yuan, and this girl comes up, and she's got this official badge. "Taxi into Shanghai?" I said, "Yeah." She spoke good, excellent English. I said, "Yes, I'll take a taxi." And so she's nosing to see how much money I'm exchanging, which I didn't exchange much because I never showed much.
Right.
I can't tell you my Argentinian story because it's too much time taken. But anyway, so I got the yuan, and I'm walking out where the taxis are, and she says, "Would you like a limousine?" And I says, "Yeah." Is it the same? $30 is what it costs to get into downtown Shanghai. So I get in the car, and I said to the driver, "Put my luggage, the big bundle luggage, in the trunk, and I'll carry this one." Well, he did this, so I knew that he understood English, see? Mm-hmm. So she shoos him off. Just as she shoos him off, another man jumps in the front seat of the car. And I said, "Oh, boy, I think I got troubles here." So I can't holler help because trains don't hear you. So we're going along. I gambled on the chance that I was all right. Well, about 5 miles down the road, they get off the expressway and go on a dirt road. And I said, "Oh, what they're going to do is they probably won't kill me." So I said to them, since I knew he was good, I said, "Isn't it wonderful that the Chinese government invited me to speak today at the hotel so-and-so?" I can't remember the whole name of the hotel. And I said, "Jiaji Zhu, the Minister of Health and Welfare, is going to be there to meet me. And I kept repeating that. Aren't you? I'm so happy that they're going to be meeting me at the hotel. Well, he got very nervous. He picked up his cell phone and he's talking on the phone to, no doubt, to that girl. And he put it down and they were talking to each other. And I could see they were nervous about something. And I kept saying, "Oh, I'm so happy that the government invited me." I said, the consulate in Washington called me also. They're coming. They're going to be there and so on. So I built it up as much. Before you know it, he takes a U-turn on the road and starts going back on the expressway. We're going on the edge of Shanghai, and all this time he's nervously talking to the girl on the. I could see that he was all, and he just on the outskirts of Shanghai. They pull over to the side of the curb. He runs behind, takes the bag out, puts it on the side, and tells me to go.
Wow.
And so it was easy. I got a taxi easy afterwards. But if I hadn't told him that I was meeting with the Chinese government,
right,
then just as he pulled away, I looked to see what the license number was. They had covered it up with a piece of cardboard. See, so anyway,
wow.
and I think just another short story about. I went to a Cornell Colgate game with my friend Robert Baker, who practiced in Ithaca, and he wasn't feeling well. So during halftime, we went back to his home in Ithaca. So anyway, he said, "Why don't you stay for dinner tonight?" His daughter owned the Toganac Inn, and said, "Well, no." I said, "No, Bob, I think I'll head home." So 4 o'clock or so, I started to head home on 34. And I'm driving along, and coming over a crest of a hill, a car is taking a U-turn in the middle of the highway,
no.
just as I come across. And I could see the look on that woman's face. If you're going at 80 miles an hour, which I was driving too fast, I came over the crest. And to the right, I quickly saw there was a lot of trees. And I went to the left, and there was only one tree, and I ended up 2 football fields in a cornfield. It was late, of course, in the fall, and all the stalk knocked my 2 rear view mirrors off, pulled the front light out.
Wow.
And so I stopped finally after, I was going pretty fast, and I also was going fast too. So I had to back up because I couldn't take a turn around and all that stalks of corn. And I said, well, I thought to myself, I should be waiting to see what happened. Nobody there. So I was so angry. I started to go towards Ithaca, and I said, "This is crazy. I'll never find who it was." So if I hadn't reacted that way, I would have gone right on the side of it. It was just, I don't think there was 2 feet as I passed her going into the field.
Wow.
So
Those
you
were
talk,
definitely...
like I say, that I had some close calls.
Yes, I'd say so.
I'm not going to tell you anymore. I'll bore you with too many. The cat has 9 lives. Well, I think I used up those 9 lives.
Dr. Joe has met numerous famous people in his life. Could you tell us about some of them?
I'm very fortunate. Really, well, let's talk about my father meeting important people, or someone that is forever. My father had a sister that married a Bermudian, and in 1908, he took a ship from New York City to Bermuda. And when he was on board this ship, he was, he was really very interesting the way he dressed. My father was always, his favorite statement is, "Clothes don't make a man, but they help a heck of a lot." See? So he was on the deck anyway. He was walking along, and there was this chair with the foot extended, and he was looking around, and he falls over this man's feet. And the man says, "You man, you're going to break a leg that way," and so on. Well, it turned out that the people said, "You know who that was?" "No." "Mark Twain."
Wow.
Mark Twain, and he actually fell into Mr. Mark Twain's lap, actually. But Mark Twain didn't write about him. But I think that I've been very fortunate the fact that I knew a fellow by the name of Władysław Dziwiec. Władysław Dziwiec was the private secretary and was his constant companion of John Paul II.
Wow.
And so that I was there for the investiture, but Dziwiec arranged for me every time that Honey and I were in Rome. I would call him up, and on Wednesdays the Pope would have allow 10 people into his private chapel for service, for a mass at 8 in the morning or whatever time. It was early in the morning. I'd get calls at 3 in the morning at the hotel that I would stay with from Javier and say, be at the North Gate. That's where and that's where was the entrance to his private quarters. And he'd say, meet your name. The Swiss Guard would have a plaque because there were 6 other, and Honey and I would be allowed to go up those 2 flights of stairs to his private quarters.
Wow.
And I have many pictures of sitting in the audience there. Usually, I tell you, the people sitting next to me was the royalty from Spain, the Queen of Spain. Not she wasn't the Queen, but she was a princess or something, or the governor of some other famous country or so on. So I was very fortunate. But if there was no room, he made room. He did. He always. But Jeeves is wonderful, and he was with him till his dying day. Another person I was very fortunate, and I think people don't realize what a wonderful president he was Gerald Ford. And I was president of the American Society, American Board of Oral Surgery. Gerald Ford was my honored guest.
Wow.
Primarily, again, we got to know his oral surgeon in Michigan, or he was a member of my group, and he was able to make contact, and he came and gave a speech and came and spent. Again, I have pictures with my entire family in my suite.
Wow, that's nice.
But I have pictures of this. We're waving. We're talking to each other. So that's probably the 2 key people that I met that there were several others, but those I'm very proud to have spent so much time with, especially with John Paul, because with John Paul I discussed the taking of food and so on, or through the Polish National Alliance.
Wow, good for you.
All right.
You had quite the
I'm
life.
a lucky guy.
You are a very lucky guy.
I'm a lucky guy.
Dr. Joe, is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Well, a lot of things I'd like to talk about, but I think that one thing that I want to say is that I really, people ask me, why did you build a band? Why did you donate to the bandstand? Why did you do the thing at the college? Why did you do that? The building here and there. My dad came here from Medina in 1909, and that's quite a bit 100 years ago. My family has really been the city of Auburn and the county and the surrounding counties have been wonderful to my family. And I show that in my appreciation to what they've done. And I really mean that from the heart, that I love the people in Auburn. They know that. I think they know that and I like to show more before I pass on that I do appreciate all they've done for my dad, my mother, my brothers, my children. And I also want to thank the putting up with me for my 94 years. I really has been a wonderful, remarkable, outstanding. It's been, as you know, I know 32 words for the word wonderful, and that's the way I feel. Thank you very much for allowing me to come into your living room. Bye.
And I want to thank you for watching Porch Talk. I'm Susie Jacob, and our guest has been Dr. Joseph Karpinski.
Yeah, one thing that I'd like to say is I'm just proud and pleased and privileged that I have somebody in the medical field that's joining me today. Susie here, Susie Jacob, as I said earlier, Jacob, is a pharmacist with Rite Aid. And I said, any questions that I have, any problems I have, I always like to clear through the pharmacist because I learned a lesson to clear through them before I start taking any medicine because they know best. They know what drugs not to take. They know what drugs not to take with other drugs and so on. And I want to thank you very much, Susie, for fitting me into your busy schedule and coming to help it and becoming. I think you do a tremendous job, and I'm sure the audience realizes what a tremendous job she did.
It's been a pleasure.
I'm a difficult person to deal with.
I love it.